You believe a young American invented Star Wars. You are about to meet the Japanese painter who truly built it, a man so broken that, one winter night, he reached for a razor and cut his own throat. Akira Kurosawa. Born 1910, died 1998. The most imitated filmmaker who ever lived. This is the story of how he conquered Hollywood, and how his own country threw him away. It is December 1971. In a small, cold bathroom in Tokyo, a 61-year-old man quietly locks the door. His last film lost money. No studio in Japan will return his calls. By every measure that matters in his own country, he is finished. He picks up a razor. And the trembling hand holding that razor belonged to the same man George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Francis Ford Coppola would each call the greatest teacher they ever had. How does the most influential director on earth end up bleeding on a bathroom floor, ignored by the country he made famous? To understand that night, you have to go back to a boy who never wanted to make films at all, and to a brother whose death he could never bring himself to speak of. Akira Kurosawa was born in Tokyo in 1910, the youngest of 8 children. He did not dream of cameras. He wanted to be a painter. As a young man he sold pictures on the street, joined a struggling artists' league, and lived hand to mouth, certain that canvas, not film, was his future. He devoured Western novels and the great Russian masters, and he carried that hunger for enormous, human stories with him for the rest of his life. The person who changed everything was his older brother, Heigo. Heigo was a bencher, a live narrator who stood beside the silver screen in the age of silent film and gave a voice to every character on it. In an era before recorded sound, the bencher was sometimes a bigger draw than the film itself, and Heigo's voice filled the largest halls in the capital. He was a star. He took his younger brother everywhere, to films, to the theater, to the circus, teaching him how a story holds a crowd in the dark. Everything Akira would one day know about rhythm, silence, and emotion, he first learned sitting in the shadows beside Heigo. His brother told him that to look away from darkness was a kind of cowardice, a lesson that would one day define every film he made. Then sound arrived. Talking pictures did not need a narrator. One by one the bencher lost their work, and Heigo lost his entire world. In July 1933, he took his own life. Half a century later, Kurosawa would title that chapter of his memoir only this, A Story I Don't Want to Tell. A grieving painter walked into a Tokyo film studio in 1936, looking only for steady work to survive. He thought it was a detour from his real life. It was the beginning of the most important career in the history of cinema. In 1950 he made a small, strange film called Rashomon, for people describing one single crime, and for completely different versions of the truth. Japan shrugged. Then, without his knowledge, someone entered it at the Venice Film Festival. It won the highest prize. Kurosawa, who had no idea it had even been submitted, found out he had conquered Europe from a reporter knocking at his door. Overnight, a West that had never watched a Japanese film discovered one. Rashomon became an English word, a name for the way the truth itself fractures depending on who is telling it. Kurosawa had not simply made a movie. He had opened a door between two worlds. But here is the part the history books quietly skip. The West did not just admire Kurosawa. It took him, scene by scene, story by story, and for years it never once said thank you. What it borrowed, it rarely credited, as if the source were too far away, in a language too few could read, to ever matter. In 1954 he made 7 samurai, 7 weary warriors defending a helpless farming village. 6 years later, Hollywood remade it as The Magnificent Seven. The gunslingers of the American West were, in secret, Japanese swordsmen. In 1961 he made Yojimbo, about a lone bodyguard turning 2 gangs against each other. An Italian director copied it so closely, without ever asking, that a young Clint Eastwood became a worldwide star in a fistful of dollars. Kurosawa's studio sued, and won. He made more from that lawsuit than from the film. "A fine movie," he said. "But it was my movie." And in 1958 he made The Hidden Fortress, the story of a hidden princess and a fallen general. But he chose to tell it through the eyes of two squabbling, cowardly peasants scrabbling at the very bottom of the world. A young film student in California watched that film again and again. When he sat down to write Star Wars, he kept one idea above all: tell the story of an entire galaxy through its two lowest, most foolish characters. The bickering peasants became two robots. The princess stayed a princess. He even borrowed Kurosawa's wipe, the way one scene slides sideways across the screen to shove in the next. So the most famous film saga in human history begins, in part, inside a black and white Japanese movie that almost no one in Japan even remembers. The man who quietly built Hollywood's imagination was about to be thrown away by Tokyo. By the late 1960s, Japan had changed. Television and cheap monster films filled the theaters. Kurosawa's slow, careful, expensive epics looked, to the new young studios, like relics from a dead age. The very qualities that had made him great, his patience, his perfectionism, his refusal to ever compromise, were now called arrogance and waste. The Emperor, they whispered, was finished. Hollywood threw him a lifeline, a huge war epic, Tora. 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 Then, in the middle of production, the American studio fired him. Rumors spread that the great director was losing his mind. In Japan, a man who had been a national treasure became a national embarrassment. He gambled everything he had left on one independent film. It failed at the box office. The debts climbed. He was 61 years old, half-blind in one eye, and for the first time in 30 years, no one in his country would hand him a camera. He had directed 30 films and shaped a century of cinema, and now he could not raise the cost of a single reel of film. Which brings us back to that locked bathroom, in December of 1971, and the razor. He survived. Barely. And the comeback that followed came from the very last place his proud country would ever have expected. Japan had no money for him. The Soviet Union did. In 1973, Moscow invited him to make a film deep in the Siberian wilderness. He spent more than a year living in the taiga, filming a story not about samurai or Japan at all, but about an old hunter and the forest that shaped him. The result, Dersu Uzala, won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film. The Emperor had risen again, in Russian, Far From Home. Then, in 1978, two young American directors heard that their hero still couldn't fund his dream project. One was Francis Ford Coppola. The other was George Lucas, by then the most powerful filmmaker alive, because of Star Wars, the very film Kurosawa had helped inspire. Lucas used that power. He pressured his own studio into funding Kurosawa's new epic, Kagemusha. Coppola joined as a producer. And to raise the rest of the money, the 70-year-old master even filmed commercials for whiskey. Lucas later said it was the strangest thing in the world, that the man who had taught him everything was scrabbling for scraps. The students were now carrying their teacher. Kagemusha won the highest prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Ram followed, and then Dreams, produced by Steven Spielberg himself. In 1990, Hollywood gave Kurosawa an honorary Oscar, handed to him, fittingly, by Lucas and Spielberg, on a stage in front of the world. It was the rarest kind of vindication. The country that had thrown him away could no longer ignore what the rest of the world had already decided. Akira Kurosawa died in 1998, 88 years old, the most imitated filmmaker who ever lived. Now think of what almost ended on that bathroom floor in 1971. No Kagemusha. No Ran. An A. Strange, quiet hole at the very center of the movies you grew up loving. His life leaves one hard, useful truth. The world may take what you make and forget your name. Your own country may decide you are finished. And still, the work can matter so much that, years later, the very people you once inspired will come back to lift you up. If you had been Kurosawa, on the very night your own country had given up on you, would you have found the strength to pick up the camera one more time? Tell me in the comments. Tales of Old Japan publishes a new story every Sunday, Wednesday, and Saturday. If this one moved you, subscribe and read more at the Japan Dispatch. The link is in the description.